Hey, Chris Webster here from Team Black. And if you're watching this, then you're either a patron on Team Black, and thank you for that, or you're a professional subscriber to the Archaeology Podcast Network, and thank you for that. If you're only one of those but not the other, let's have a conversation because APN Pro members actually get free Team Black with their APN Pro subscription. So if you want all the content over at Team Black, you get an APN Pro subscription plus all the benefits you get with that. And you can come over and get all the Team Black stuff. But if you're only interested in certain levels of Team Black, then stay right on Patreon because you're in the right spot. Now let's get into this webinar on fixing your digital workflow. And this is going to be a relatively short one because I usually do this live and in person, and the last section of it is talking about your workflow. So if you have questions, you want to contact me, you can hit me up on the email address in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and it's chriswebster@digtech-llc.com. If it's a question about WildNote, who I also work for and do development for and sales, then you can hit me up at chris@wildnoteapp.com. All right. So on this one, you can see all the little things we're going to do here. We'll have an overview. We'll talk about the components of your digital workflow and how all that integrates, and then time for you to send me questions when you can. All right. So again, we're going to go over the components of your digital workflow, and obviously this is a one-way conversation. So we'll have average components of people's digital workflow with some extra stuff thrown in just in case, integrating your technology and effective use of it, using the right tool for the right job, and then, of course, your workflow. Okay. So what are the components of your digital workflow? Do you know what each is capable of? What are the limitations of those? And who is the expert? For each one of these things on the right side, you need to ask those questions. There are certain things in the office, certain things you use in the field that one person or another might be the expert. Everybody who's running an archaeology company knows there's a GIS expert, there's a in-field GPS expert, whether that's a Garmin or a Trimble or an Arrow or something else. There's a total station expert. Everybody has these experts. And while it's important to know who that expert is in your office, it's also important to know what the limitations of those things are, what the limitations of your expert are, and for the expert to be constantly training somebody else. Because as we know, in this field, somebody could be gone the next day, and now you got to train somebody else up. So something I learned in the Navy was always be training your replacement. And it's a good policy for company owners and project managers that are salaried with a company, so therefore full-time, theoretically, to make sure that there's more than one person that know how to do that job. And that can be tough, but it's an important thing to recognize. All right, so in the office, keeping these things down on the left-hand side here in mind, we have some things to think about. Obviously, computers. Not every department has an IT department. The IT department is not just for doing the hardware troubleshooting on your computer, like my mouse doesn't work anymore, but also for doing software uploads, making sure you don't install some sort of software that's going to conflict with things you need for your computer to work. Restricting domains that you can go to on the internet. They also do that. But if you don't have that size of company and you don't have that person, then you really need somebody that understands the platforms that you're using and how to upgrade those, how to operate those, because when they go down, you're out of business, right? Like, you need to understand what happens when those fail and what your backup plan for that is. Field laptops are the same thing, but often the person in the office that is responsible for the computers is not in the field. And I work here in Nevada, and that can be a huge problem if people in the field don't understand how to operate the field laptops, if they indeed using field laptops still. A lot of companies aren't anymore. But if you're bringing a laptop into the field for various reasons, then you need somebody out there that really knows how to do the troubleshooting, how to fix it when it breaks, and how to do software upgrades and deal with that. Know when to do software upgrades. If you got to load up all your GIS information at the end of the day, then probably not the best time to do a Windows update because it could take hours. Do that right before you go to bed. Servers, some of the bigger companies and even mid-sized to small companies these days have servers, and servers can be either on-site or off-site, but they're basically a location where all your data is stored. And we tend to put those in a closet and forget them, but servers are incredibly important. And when they fail, again, you lose everything. So having digital backups of your servers, having what's called a RAID server, which is basically stores your stuff in two different hard drives and they're mirror images of each other with the thought that they both won't fail simultaneously. But when one fails, you've got an automatic copy of your data right there. So think about stuff like that. And check your server cabinet at your office often. A lot of times they're dusty, dirty environments because nobody ever goes in there. They just stay on and powered up. And as long as they're working, no one ever goes in that room. But who knows if you've got mice coming in there, or if they're getting dirty, if the fans need to be cleaned, something. And it needs to be cool in there too. Server rooms are often really warm, and that is, death for computers and electronics. Of course, your internet. We do everything on the internet these days, and when that goes down, it can cause a huge problem in your system. So again, make sure you have somebody identified in the office that knows how to fix all that stuff. Tablets. Of course, using tablets in the office is important because you don't want to bring all your tablets into the field and find out that a mandatory software upgrade is not allowing you to use the tablets. And are you noticing a theme here? Software upgrades are important. A lot of people will avoid them thinking it's going to break their device, and sometimes it will. But there's plenty of resources online from people that do actually complete the software upgrades on whatever tablet or device you're talking about immediately, and they will let you know whether or not there's any issues. Now, you have to pair the software version with the device you're using, because a lot of times those comparisons are made for the most current device. So let's take iPhone, for example. I'm recording this in July of 2019. And currently the iPhone XS Max, one of those variations, is the current device. So when they talk about software compatibility on a new software release, it's really related to that device. And other devices can use it, but there is going to be limitations, and you have to understand what those are. Of course, your database is a component of your digital office, and it's probably stored on the server, or hopefully not one of those computers, but if it is on one of those computers, they're networked together, so there's only one copy of it. You don't want multiple copies, except in the circumstance of like a RAID storage device where there's not multiple copies being accessed at the same time. They're just multiple copies for security. So database is another area of your technical component where there's usually one person in the office that really understands how it was constructed and how to add data to it and how to query it and do things like that. So make sure other people understand that in case that person at some point no longer works for your company. Of course, GIS, everybody has a GIS expert on staff. GIS is incredibly important and a necessary thing that we have. And again, you often have just a GIS department where there's maybe one person in there, and they are the expert. And not everybody else knows how to maybe access their maps, how to access their data, but not how to really use it and really get into it. And again, you do some upgrade on the software and something changes and you're not familiar enough with it to understand how to fix that, then that becomes a major liability for your company and could result in some serious downtime. Field recording and management software, whatever you're using to record in the field, whether it's WildNote or Collector or Survey123 or something else, somebody needs to understand how to use that stuff. Again, I work for WildNote, and we often find that there's an office manager or somebody else who is the office admin on WildNote, and while that's okay as long as they understand what's going on, typically they're not field people. They're not either biologists or archaeologists or whoever's using this, and they don't really understand how to create forms and do things like that. They know how to add and upload, change users and the high-level information, but when it gets down to actually using it, they're often not the experts that should be doing that. So you can have different levels of exports for your field recording software. Have somebody that understands how to keep the billing accurate, because if your billing's not accurate, you could find yourself out in the field with something that's expired or an expired credit card or something like that if it's monthly billing, and all of a sudden you don't have access, and you don't want to have that happen. So you need somebody that's on top of that. But you also need somebody that's on top of actually managing the software. If it's customizable, which it should be, if it's customizable, you need someone that can do the customizations and then make the changes and understand how that works and what that means when you go out in the field. Of course, word processing software, I only mention this because people are still using Microsoft Word and things like that. If you're using the right field recording and management software, you should be able to just export what you need from there. But if you are still using something like this, again, make sure that you're using compatible versions. If it's too old, it won't be compatible with other people's versions. And make sure that it's word processing software that works across platform. For example, I've got all Apple computers, and I use Pages for a lot of the things that I do that's just for me. But if it's anything that I think might have to go to somebody else outside my computer, I just simply use Microsoft Word. I can convert from Pages to Word, but it's not always the best conversion, so I don't bother with that. Of course, you'll need a PDF reader. PDF readers are important because everything's in PDF these days. You might have to pay for Acrobat Pro in order to get some of the higher level security features of modern PDF reading devices. And if you want to create some things like some fancy stuff like GeoPDFs and things like that, then you're going to need the higher end software, and you're going to have to know how to use it. Okay, so mobile digital workflow components, a lot of those same things are in there, but now they're in field use. And it's a different person in the field that understands the capabilities, understands the limitations, and is the expert. It could be an entirely different person. Depending on the size of your company, it might be the same person that does the stuff in the office, but then you run into the issue of if that person's in the field and other people in the offices have issues, then you need to have other experts. So keep that in mind. You need somebody on each crew that understands how to do that stuff. Two of the biggest things that are used on crews these days for archaeological site recording and documentation is phones and tablets. Again, really understanding the software that you're using and the combination of software packages that you're using and how those work on each device. I did consulting for a company a few months ago, my time, and one of the things we had to do was actually install the software on the first morning of the project for all the new people in the field that had never worked for that company before or had never used that software before, one of those two things. And there were some challenges. Somebody had an older phone, and it turns out they didn't have any memory because the phone had like 2 gigabytes of memory to begin with. So we actually had to delete some applications and look at deleting some photos and things like that in order to install the software and then use the software. So you have to understand how to work through those things if you're going to have a seamless activity in the field. You really need some uber geek when it comes to phones and tablets, to be honest. Somebody that watches the videos and the keynotes and the things like that when they come out and stays on top of that information. And when your software fails or maybe the device fails, they can kind of suss out why that happened based on what they know of the systems and how they integrate well with each other. Of course, everybody's using GPS devices as well. Whatever you're using, again, it's important to identify the expert and then know the limitations of the GPS devices. Are you getting real-time correction? Are you getting different things? Are you getting the proper accuracy you need in the area that you're working in? And if you're not, do you know how to do that? Do you know how to get the right antenna or swap out your GPS device for one that does get the accuracy that you need? Understanding all those things is important, and again, having an expert for that stuff in the field is crucial, but making sure everyone has a fundamental understanding of how that works is also important. Of course, field laptops, I talked about these already, but having an expert in the field that understands, again, how to work these things and how to keep them upgraded and operating in an offline condition, because you're often offline out there, but also how to integrate them, because I've had problems with people not knowing how to download data off of a Trimble, because they didn't know how to plug the Cradle or whatever the Trimble device was into the laptop and then how to pull the data off of there. And it was just an issue, and that needed to be solved. So things you need to think about before you go in the field. Of course, we've already talked about digital field recording software. All of these things work with your digital field recording software, and you need to make sure that all these things work well together. And when they don't, you understand how to do the failures. I'm also a pilot, and one thing you learn as a pilot is it's actually easy to fly a plane. It's not that hard to stay straight and level and not turn very much, turn out your plane, and just stay. It's actually pretty easy to take off too. What's difficult are the failures. When something goes wrong, when you've got a fuel problem, when you've got an engine problem, when you've got another hardware problem or something like that, you need to know immediately how to fix that stuff. And that's what we train for. We train for the failures. And by training for the failures, you understand how to operate the device properly in a safe manner. Okay, so some other components that we can talk about that you may or may not have, but some things that might be part of your digital workflow. External rugged batteries, of course, all your digital components run on electricity. So it's beneficial, not necessarily crucial in some cases, depending on how much you use things and how well their batteries are. And battery life is often tied to how the battery is being used and the age of the battery. So if the battery's only being used a little bit but constantly being charged, and the type of battery you have can't handle that, then you're going to destroy the battery. If it's a battery that needs to be cycled all the way down occasionally and then cycled back up, or cycled down to a certain percentage and cycled back up in order to maintain effectiveness, and nobody's doing that, well, it's going to reduce it. So having external rugged batteries, and I say rugged batteries because you need something that can handle the components and the weather conditions that you are in. So the components being, can it plug into your GPS? Can it plug into your phone? Can it plug into your tablet? Can it plug into your GPS antenna or something like that? Can it charge those things? But then again, how many of those can it charge at once? How often can it charge them? And if you drop it in the water, is it still going to work? Most of them, the answer is no. So keep that in mind. But a lot of them have rugged cases that if they do drop, it's kind of a shock case, and it won't be damaged too much, and will probably still work. But if you submerge it in the water, it's not going to work. But if it gets a little bit of rain and stuff on it, then it'll probably be okay. Again, look at the requirements of your device, look at where you're working, and get the appropriate gear. External wireless memory. So I use something called a SanDisk Wi-Fi Connect, I think it's called. And it's a pretty great little USB stick. And if you're using a digital recording software that allows you to save information to the device, basically export out from the software into the device, then the way the SanDisk one works, and there's other ones out there, but the way this one works is you actually then go into that SanDisk app on your device, your tablet or smartphone, and then you pull that information off the system's hard drive and into that application. And then you go into your Wi-Fi, you connect to this little device, and the one I have connects up to 8 devices at once, and then it uses their application to transfer information from your tablet to that little component stick. So the nice thing about that is it expands your memory if you're running into issues, taking a lot of pictures, videos, something like that. But it also is a backup. This is assuming that you don't have cell service or Wi-Fi in the field. And it allows you to save off the device and onto something else. Now, if you don't have one of those, often you can save to another device. Like you can AirDrop on Apple devices from one device to the next. You need your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned on, but they're not actually Bluetoothing each other, and they're not actually connecting to Wi-Fi. It's just using those two antennas to connect the devices and send the information. And there's nothing you have to really do. It's called AirDrop. So check that out, and it's a good way to secure your information just in case you drop a tablet down a mine shaft or something like that, or off the back of a truck. Who knows? But at least you've got it saved in some other place. Of course, a lot of people have smartwatches these days, and it can be a component of your digital system, and just understanding the limitations and how it works is pretty important. I use a couple different applications that have smartwatch applications, and they allow me to set a heading or something like that, but then not pay attention to my phone and just throw it in my pocket, and my watch will alert me when I get within a certain distance of that waypoint. That app is called GPS Tracks, and it works really well for that. But there's other ones that will allow you to use proximity or something like that to see really quick pieces of information. Anything that allows you to keep that nice bright screen off on your tablet or your smartphone and use something else to do just a little information and then pull that out when you need to really record will just save the batteries in those things. And anytime you can save battery power, you're a step ahead. Drones and drone cameras, again, these things need to be kept clean. They need to be in good working condition. They should always be pre-operationally checked or pre-op checked before you leave, especially if you rely on these things. You should always flip the drone on real quick, make sure it starts up, make sure it does its pre-op checks, make sure the camera works. A lot of times that connection between the camera and the drone can be a little sketchy, and you want to make sure those things work before you go out into the field. Also, make sure you got the right lenses on, the right types of cameras. Is it set up correctly? Is the application signed in? DJI drones require you to sign into an application. And if it requires a firmware update or something like that, you could get out in the field with no service. And if it knows it needs that update and you haven't done it, then you're not going anywhere. Okay? That's not always the case, but that could be the case. So one more thing to check before you leave the truck or head out into the field. And I put these up there just for fun, augmented reality glasses, because I want it to be a real thing, but it's really not. I think more likely we're going to end up with augmented reality tablets and smartphones, which we already have, but an application that allows you to see real-time data in the field and understand where all that stuff's at. But it just as far as I know, doesn't exist yet. But if that existed, and then we got to the glasses stage, and a crew chief could just put these on and scan around and say, okay, that's been recorded, that's been recorded, that's been recorded, that's been identified but not recorded yet. That one doesn't have a GPS position. That one doesn't have a photo, something like that. Or take a look around, and without gathering the information physically from other people's devices, can look at it and say, oh, okay, so that's a, Elco corner notch projectile point of obsidian. That's a, tin can, something like that. So that would be pretty cool. But of course it doesn't exist for archaeology. It exists, just not for archaeology. So hopefully that's part of our digital workflow in the not too distant future. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a pretty scary graphic for some people, but it's my idea of how a lot of these major components fit together. And let's take a look at that right now. So working from left to right, you've got your sources of data, and starting with a literature search, your own company database, your GIS that has mapping data in it, but also could contain the database like a geodatabase. And then, of course, a web search for basic information. I mean, I could have put books on here, but that's generally thought to exist in these other things here. And then I always number my folders for different projects with numbers in brackets, and I give it the same structure. I create a template, and then I have all these folders in it. And then when I have a new project, I simply copy that template into a new folder, and I number them so everything shows up in the order that I want it to show up, and it's not confused with anything else. I don't like the underscores, things like that. This is just clean, looks nice, and I always have this structure. Now, I use this structure for a lot of things I do, and a lot of times you go from earliest to latest, and what that means is I usually have sources as like a 00 folder or a 01 folder, and then 10 as versions. And what versions means is that the only thing that should be in versions is really the final report, not a draft report, the final report, or anything that's final in this project. Now, if it's a component of the final report, then it's not final, is it? So the final report would be the only thing that goes in there. But let's say you have site records being submitted separately, then a folder containing all your site records that are finished would go into versions, something like that. Or maybe your GIS data is being saved separately, then you might have a folder within versions called GIS, and then your GIS data are saved right there. All your shapefiles and things are right there in that folder. So I always have that at the bottom, so it's always labeled 10. If I need more folders between 1 and 10, then I'll jump up to 20 or I'll jump up to 30. But either way, it's always at the bottom, so I know where to find it and I can find it quickly. So once you have your structure set up, you need to go collect your data, and you use tablets, phones, GPS, laptop, camera, drone. Now, if you look at these lines here, so all of your source information goes into your lit search folder, and then your server structure folder is basically coming out, and you're collecting data using that folder structure with tablets, phones, GPS, and laptop. Okay, some of this is going into those devices, and that's why it's there. You might have previously recorded site records, you might have shapefiles, things like that, that are going into those devices, and that's why it's going in on the left. Of course, nothing's coming into the camera or drone from the lit search, because those are data creation devices, not input devices. They're output devices. So moving on and following the color structure, so tablets are going to collect data and send those off to site data. For all your field data, you're going to collect site data with those. You're going to collect field notes. You're going to collect site photos. And you could be collecting GPS data as well. Phones are all the same thing. They're just smaller tablets in this day and age. Of course, your GPS is going into site data and GPS data. Your camera, if it's an external camera, is going to go to site photos, field notes, site data. And then, of course, the drone is collecting usually photographic information and then GPS data. Now, looking at field data, I've got all these things under here, and we see what the inputs are, but where do those go? So site data is going to go into your site forms, going to go into your maps, report, and, of course, your company archive eventually. Field notes, probably just going into your company archive, although it could be argued that some of the field notes are going to be used to update maps in the report and the site forms. So, that goes where you need it to go. Site photos, again, go into all four. Landscape photos are pretty much the same thing, but are typically not going to go into your site forms or your maps, and will go into your report if you need them. And then, of course, your company archive, where everything goes. And then, of course, your GPS data goes into your site forms, your maps, and your company archive. And it could be argued that it goes into your report, but I would argue that the maps go into your report. So there would be another thing over there. So you've got sources, field devices, field data, and outputs. And if you put together something like this for your company and understand where things are coming from, what's using those things, and where they eventually go, then it might help people understand as you progress through your digital revolution, I should say, or your digital evolution, to understand where these things fit in the larger scheme of things, where they fit in the big picture. To me, that's the biggest problem with a lot of this stuff is people see these things and they just don't know how it fits. They're like, oh my God, one more piece of technology, one more piece of gear, one more piece of software. Where does it fit in the digital workflow? So set something else up like this for your own company or even just your own personal use, but share it with your fellow field techs, and you'll have better success and a better understanding of how all this works together. Okay, so that's it. From here on out, I usually go into your workflow section, but of course, feel free to send me an email, chriswebster@digtech-llc.com. If they're simple questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you want some longer consultation time on setting up your digital workflow or something like that, or figuring out how something fits or setting up one of those sample integrations, then I'll send you over to my consultation page. But in the meantime, again, Chris Webster at digtech-llc.com. Thank you to our Patreon subscribers for making these videos happen. Thank you to our APN subscribers for all the things you do for the APN and also helping to make these videos happen. This has been Chris Webster, and hopefully you've just fixed your digital workflow. Thanks a lot.